when we want an explanation for why things are a particular way, it seems like there's nothing more satisfying than a good scientific one. But does science really give us explanations, or does it just describe what is the case? Let's consider. Hello philosophers, I'm Chico. Welcome to the Philosopher Show, where we consider the greatest questions of human history. In your mind, what constitutes a good explanation? In one part of Plato's dialogue, the Phaedo, he has Socrates, the main character, ask that very question. And I think his answer is a little bit surprising. So, I'm 6'2". Let's say I ask the question, what makes me tall? And imagine you give a perfect scientific explanation. Something like, you consume certain foods, your body has a particular sequence of DNA, and for those reasons your body has more stuff, and that more stuff is what makes you tall. But is this why I'm tall? Socrates doubts this, and he gives something like a following scenario as an analogy. He says it would be like if somebody wanted to know why I was doing YouTube philosophy videos, and you described to that person how the mechanics of my body made it such that I could sit down, and the properties of light and sound waves made it possible for you to see me and to hear me, and all those things will go into describing exactly how it's possible that I can make a YouTube video. But it doesn't describe to you why I'm making the YouTube video. What you've done is you've given the necessary conditions for me to make a YouTube video, but you've fallen short of an explanation. So Socrates says, at one time he was really enamored with natural science, but if our method is purely observation, then all we can really expect is a description of what follows what. Let me give you one more example, and hopefully it will explain exactly what Socrates is getting at here. Unless your monitor is very poor, you'll notice that I'm a brown man. But why am I brown? Now you could give me a really good scientific explanation. You could say that my skin soaks in certain frequencies of light, reflects other frequencies of light, they hit your eyes, particular nerve signals get sent to your brain, and your brain interprets those signals as brown. But now notice, this explains what happens, but it doesn't explain why. Why does this frequency result in brown instead of red? Why do these specific signals get sent rather than other signals? Why do these specific signals get interpreted as brown instead of red? The problem is, natural science has identified the necessary conditions for me to see brown, but it seems like those conditions are compatible with any number of outcomes. Why these specific outcomes? Now don't get me wrong, I am not anti-science. However, I do think Socrates makes a good point here. Now Socrates believes he's identified a methodology that will result in a good explanation of causes. He says he takes what is most plausible, a theory that seems the most compelling, and he posits that as a hypothesis. Then he goes on and applies that hypothesis to particular cases. He sees if the results are compatible with that hypothesis, and also, is that hypothesis compatible with other stuff that we already know? Now, if it seems to succeed time and time again, possibly we've reached the cause. And this is Socrates' third argument for the existence of forms. Why is it that I'm tall, I'm brown, etc., etc.? Socrates says, let's take as a hypothesis that there is such a thing called brown, a real thing that's separate from all brown things. And what makes things brown is that they participate in that brown form. Or, what makes things tall? Well, there is a capital F form, tallness, and the different tall things all participate in that one form. And that's what makes them tall. Now what's nice about this explanation is that we know exactly why the things that are tall now. It's because they're related correctly to this thing, tallness itself. There's no disconnect between conditions and results here. For example, Socrates considers, what would it be like to say that what makes me tall is that I am a head above people? Well, how can your head make you taller than other people? Some people's heads make them smaller than other people, and heads are small themselves. So the exact same thing is making some people small and some people tall. The exact same thing is small but is making other things tall. According to Socrates' hypothesis of the forms, tallness itself isn't mixed with small at all. So there's no confusion as to how this specific thing could cause this specific effect. It just is that effect. Now, this hypothesis seems to explain things very well. It seems to not contradict with anything that we know. As far as Socrates' methodology is concerned, we know that there are forms. And notice, this is a little different than those other arguments I gave you from the idea of knowledge. They give us one more bit of insight into the doctrine of the forms. Now we know that the forms are separate from the particulars that have them, are real, and cause the particulars that have them to have the properties that they do. Now, one objection that Socrates considers is that possibly these answers aren't very informative. He calls them safe but simple-minded causes. What causes me to be brown? Brownness. However, know that this is a little bit more than just repeating ourselves. This isn't so simple as just saying you're brown because you're brown. Socrates has identified some aspects of the forms. We know that they are the object of our knowledge, never admixed with opposites, real and separate from the things that have them. And if any of those things don't sound familiar, go back and check out my last video on the forms of Plato. Now, Socrates considers one last explanation. Maybe we can have a natural science explanation that fits in with a definition of the forms. So, for example, what makes something cold? We could say snow, and here's why. Just like the form of cold, snow is always cold and never mixed with hot. Also, snow can't make other things hot. So it seems like snow would be a great explanation here. Unfortunately, snow isn't involved in making every single thing cold, so it lacks this universal reach in the explanation of causes. So Socrates says it would be a clever response. So here seems to be one last criterion of explanations of causes. They should identify what gives rise to what. They should explain why it gives rise to that specific effect and not something else, and they should be as general as possible. Now, what does all this mean for us? Should we believe in Socrates' methodology? Should we throw out natural science? Not necessarily. Notice that Socrates doesn't go so far as to say that natural science is bunk. He just says it describes what follows from what, and that's a very noble pursuit. His point is solely that we also need philosophy if we're going to explain causes. So can you marry the two methodologies? Sure. And in fact, there may be more methodologies that are available to us. When Socrates describes natural science, it seems like he is talking about observation alone rather than testing for hypotheses. And when Socrates describes philosophy, he's talking about one method of doing philosophy. But there are other philosophers that use different methods. Socrates' point really is just that his method for determining the existence of forms, even though it doesn't follow a natural science method, is still a legitimate one. Now, I've been using Socrates' name, but remember, this is Plato's dialogue. He has Socrates talking in the dialogue, so likely this is actually Plato's ideas. So there you go, 3 arguments that Plato gives for the existence of forms in his work, the Phaedo. We all ready to pack it up? Do we all believe in forms now? Well, interestingly enough, there are still some criticisms to consider, and the best ones come from none other than Plato himself. Stay tuned to the Universals playlist to see more about objections against Plato from Plato. If you have more questions about this, if you're in the middle of a metaphysics class and you're still not quite sure, please hit me up on the comments. I'd love to answer any questions you have. Also, please tag your friends that are in your class with you. Hopefully this will help them too. That's all I got for today. Adios.